Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Peralivas, and that rhymes with For All of Us, and I'm the People's Party candidate for the Guelph riding for the October 21st federal election. I hope you vote for me. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about gun bans. Global News is reporting, quote, Trudeau vows to ban military-style assault rifles, including the AR-15. All right, what does that look like? I'm not going to read this article, but the link is in the description if you'd like to read it. I'm going to get right to the point. Here's Lloyd Longfield. Lloyd Longfield is the currently elected Liberal MP for Guelph, and he's the candidate running for re-election. So, he says, a re-elected Liberal government will ban all military-style assault rifles, including the AR-15. These weapons are specifically designed to inflict mass human casualties. We will also work with the province of Ontario and City of Guelph to discuss the issue of handgun violence. What do you think? Should Guelph also ban handguns? It's a conversation that we should be willing to have as a community, and I'd be open to hosting a community town hall with municipal representatives to discuss this. I wonder if he'd be willing to do this before the election. I'd be interested in what all of the other candidates have to say about this, including myself. Lloyd is my competition. This is my YouTube channel, and this is the part of my election campaign, so thanks for watching. All right, here is CBC News, and it says, CBC News Calgary reporting, police chiefs say a handgun ban won't stop the flow of weapons into Canada. This was reported August 14th, 2019. The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police won't be supporting a call for a ban on handguns despite concerns about gun violence in a number of major cities, including Toronto. Vancouver Police Chief Adam Palmer, who heads the organization, says Canada already has strong firearms regulations and no other law is required. Toronto Mayor John Tory is asking the federal government for a handgun ban, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said he will consider additional gun control measures. There were 14 separate shootings recorded in Toronto over the August long weekend alone. Palmer says that in the majority of cases involving gun violence, the handguns being used are already illegal, and it makes no sense to ban something that is already prohibited. Quote, in every single case, there are already offenses for that. They're already breaking the law, and the criminal law in Canada addresses all of those circumstances, Palmer said Wednesday at the conclusion of the association's annual conference. The firearms laws in Canada are actually very good right now. They're very strict. The Prime Minister has highlighted recently passed gun control legislation that extends the scope of background checks and strengthens record-keeping requirements for gun retailers. Earlier this week, he said Canadians will learn more about Liberal plans for gun control during the upcoming campaign. I mean, is that what they meant? Or will there be more than that? I wonder. Back to the article. Quote, I very much look forward to the election campaign in which we'll be able to share with Canada our vision for how to keep Canadians safer, Trudeau said. That involves, yes, strengthening gun control, but it also involves investments that, are so deeply needed in community infrastructure. And I want to point out, when they have this ... the person could have said anything in there. They could have had a long, drawn-out diatribe about a whole bunch of other stuff. And so the newspaper is condensing for brevity. I do the same thing. Sometimes I don't read the whole article, but at the same time, you have to be wary of that because things can get said in there that are meaningful or that change the context. I just want you to be aware, okay? So Trudeau said at least that, but probably more. Back to the article. Palmer suggested that handguns would still be around, even with a ban, because of Canada's proximity to the United States. Quote, people can't be naive to the realities of how it works with organized crime and smuggling, he said. There will always be an influx of guns from the United States into Canada, said Palmer. Heroin is illegal in Canada too, but we have heroin in Canada. The association also discussed harassment and bullying in the workplace and the importance of making sure there are mental health supports for those in policing. I just want to point out, this is where the article starts tap dancing away from the actual point of the article, which is handgun control, right? They're talking about, and it's very, I mean, I don't know that it's well done, but it is done, right? It's starting to walk you away from the thing you read the article, or you started to read the article about. Here's the Globe and Mail, and they say how the Globe tried and failed to find the source of Canada's crime guns. This one's a little bit of a long article, but I think it's really worthwhile because it's so interesting to put into context, well, how little information we have about this. Really, we don't know a lot about the gun crime and the source of those guns in Canada. It's very, very concerning. Here's the article. In August 2018, amid a national debate over a handgun ban following a deadly shooting in Toronto's Danforth neighborhood, the Globe set out to answer one question central to the debate. Where do the guns used in crimes come from? Those in favor of a ban pointed to statistics saying the number of so-called crime guns from domestic sources was on the rise, citing a detective with Toronto Police Guns and Gangs Unit who said that in 2017, half the city's crime guns came from within Canada. Police forces out west have come up with similar figures. In 2014, an annual report by the RCMP's Firearms Operation and Enforcement Support Unit, a team tasked with finding trends in illegal firearms, found that 114 of the 229 of crime guns successfully traced in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the Northwest Territories, and Yukon were sourced domestically. That means from Canada. These figures are disputed by those opposed to a ban, who argue that legally obtained guns are not the weapons used in cases like the Danforth shooting, and that gun sourcing figures don't take into consideration the number of guns that can't be traced. In an effort to build a national picture of crime gun sourcing, we filed more than 40 access to information requests to governments and the largest metropolitan police forces in the country. We also spoke to dozens of academics, policymakers, and people with law enforcement experience to determine what kinds of data points we should be asking for, and requested a laundry list of information, including the type of gun, whether it was used in a crime, how many times it was used in a crime, whether the gun had been traced, and if so, the results of that trace. We surfaced dozens of data sets covering everything from ballistics to lost and stolen firearms. The data showed how often guns were seized, what kind of guns were used in crimes, and how often police could match crime guns across different cases, but nothing about where they were coming from. Our access to information requests to multiple police forces also came up short. Of the 36 forces across the country from which we requested firearms tracing data, none were able to provide it. In almost all cases, we found the police level tracing information, when it existed, was kept as a written report attached to an individual case files. The police force said they would have to spend hundreds of thousands of hours to find, scan, redact, and release each tracing report for the thousands of firearms they seized each year. It could be years before we received the files we'd requested. The fee estimates were often staggering. The Peterborough Police Service quoted us $4,000 to provide any kind of tracing information. Windsor said it would cost $6,000. Our largest fee estimate came from the Greater Sudbury Police Service, which asked for $26,460 to produce the files. We eventually changed our request to accommodate what the police force felt they were capable of providing in a reasonable time frame, which meant excluding tracing information and focusing on seized and surrender statistics, which would show us number and kinds of firearms law enforcement were seizing. Some police forces refused to release anything at all. The Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, sorry if I got that wrong, a provincial police force that is also the local police in St. John's, denied us outright, as did the Longueuil and Quebec City police forces. Further complicating matters, police forces across the country do not use the same digital records-keeping systems for their case files. In Canada, most police services use one of two major record management software systems, Versaterm or Niche. In practice, this means the data we receive differed substantially depending on the record system used by that particular police force. The use of two different systems has also led to problems for the RCMP, which polices communities in many parts of the country. Nationally, the RCMP employs the Niche system, but in British Columbia, it uses the Versaterm for contractual reasons. Since the systems can't communicate with each other, any data-heavy analysis of the RCMP's case files requires two separate data extractions, one for each system. In Ontario, police forces do work together to keep centralized records of tracing information. Most police forces submit their seized crime gun to the Ontario Provincial Police for testing and analysis and receive a report that logs the test results and sourcing for each gun if it can be determined. Results are logged in the province's Firearm Tracing and Enforcement database, FATE. The Globe filed an access to information request for the copy of the FATE database in December 2018 and was denied access in January. An appeal of that decision is ongoing. Meanwhile, our request suggests another possible source of tracing information, the Public Agents Firearm Regulation Database, PAFR, an inventory of seized and surrendered weapons for police forces across the country. However, the version of the PAFR the Globe received did not contain all the fields we requested, including sourcing information. Often guns are not traced at all. Assuming an investigator decides to trace a firearm, it gets sent to a forensics lab for testing, where technicians might test fire the weapon and log its ballistic signature or use acids and other chemicals to restore the firearm's serial number if it's been filed off. But tracing is expensive. Police forces must pay for technicians' time, and it's time consuming. Besides, tracing a gun often does nothing to help solve the crime at hand, meaning many jurisdictions simply don't bother. Even when the firearms are traced, there can be significant backlogs. The RCMP's forensic lab can take up to a year to trace a gun after receiving a request from a police service. Some police services have resorted to analyzing the tracing firearms themselves. The Toronto Police Service has its own forensic lab and policy of tracing every single firearm it receives. That means it has a very good idea of how many seized firearms were sourced domestically. According to a 2018 report from the Toronto Police Firearms Enforcement Unit obtained through Access to Information request, 70% of Toronto's crime guns for which sourcing could be determined came from the United States, compared to the 50% average between 2014 and 2017. Toronto Police attributed the increase in foreign sourcing in 2018 to 2 large seizures by the Guns and Gangs unit. Jo Young Lee, a professor of sociology at the University of Toronto, whose research focuses on gun violence, says keeping this firearm sourcing data should become standard for police services. Without it, policymakers are left in the dark. Quote, any kind of discussion about a federal ban would need to have some data to support that it would significantly reduce the stockpile of firearms that people are using in crimes, he said. Mr. Lee also notes that while Canada's gun laws are more restrictive than those in the United States, Americans have far greater access to data on guns and gun violence. Statistics Canada has begun to address these blind spots. As reported by the Globe earlier this year, the department completed a survey of police forces about the data they currently collect, a first step in centralizing tracing information and eventually closing the gap. To me, it's a call for more data and a more serious eye on the trends, Mr. Lee says. Meanwhile, more than a year later, we've filed our first access to information requests, and with several still outstanding, we're no closer to finding the answer. And the question is, where did the guns come from? Well, it looks like depends on your perspective. So without the data, how can we possibly move forward with a ban like this? Particularly when 70% in 2017 were coming from the United States. If there are a drop, or if there's a drop in domestic sourcing, well, wouldn't the smuggling increase? Wouldn't there be an increase in foreign smuggling of guns? And if so, what's the Liberals' plan to stop that? Because we've seen their response to increased crime and increased gun crime, despite presumably having access to the Toronto police records. So why no response to the leaky border? Why no response to stopping the guns traveling over our southern border? I'm not sure I understand fully, but I'd love to talk to you about it, Lloyd. I really would. So let's do this. Let's have a town hall. Let's discuss an AR-15 ban. Let's discuss a handgun ban. Let's discuss the need in Guelph. Is there one? Are these AR-15s and handguns the thing that the police want to be talking about most? Is that the biggest problem that they have to deal with? Because from what I hear, it's fentanyl and homelessness. It's not handgun bans and not AR-15s. But maybe that's just what I hear. Thanks for watching, everybody. My name's Mark Peralivas. That rhymes with For All of Us, and I'm the People's Party candidate for the October 21st federal election. I hope you vote for me. Have a wonderful, wonderful night.